What's up, space pirates? This is your Admiral, the obviously awesome Dr. Disaster. And for years now, the excuse that Square Enix used to justify transforming Final Fantasy's combat system from turn-based combat into whatever this is right here, well, the excuse is that turn-based combat doesn't sell.
Trust me.
No, I don't think I will.
Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not trying to shit on this style of combat that we've got playing in the background here. If you like it, then that's cool, but to suggest that this sells better than turn-based style combat is ludicrous, as proven by the recent release Clair Obscur Expedition 33. Just look at the latest Final Fantasy games and their numbers on Steam. Final Fantasy 16 peaked at about 27,000 players on the platform. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth hit 40,000 players. Final Fantasy VII Remake hit just under 14,000. And Final Fantasy 15 topped out at 29,000. All of these games used the non-turn-based combat that Final Fantasy has embraced recently, and yet they are getting smoked by Clair Obscur Expedition 33.
We're not worthy! We're not worthy!
Clair Obscur has so far hit over 71,000 concurrent players on Steam, which is incredibly impressive considering this is a game that had about 30 developers working on it. This is a new studio with a brand new IP, and yet it is blowing Final Fantasy games out of the water while using the combat system that put the FF franchise on the map in the first place.
Ironic.
That doesn't seem fair.
It really does seem like Final Fantasy was silly to have completely abandoned the turn-based combat. There seems to be a real thirst for this style of game. Clair Obscur is succeeding despite the fact that it is competing head-to-head with Elder Scrolls Oblivion Remastered, the shadow drop that has taken the gaming world by storm this past week, and despite the fact that Clair Obscur was released on Game Pass on day one. This game had every excuse to flop, but gamers have embraced it, and it managed to shrug off the adversity and smash the people who argued that turn-based combat does not sell. Alright me hearties, make sure you hit the like button on this video, share it with your friends, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet, and also, please consider supporting the channel by becoming a member. The first part of the novel that I've written, a dark fantasy story called The Darkest Heritage, is now available in audiobook form for members only, and I've gotten some crazy good feedback thus far. The book itself will be available to purchase on Amazon in the near future, but in the meantime, if you want to support alternatives to mainstream culture, consider becoming a channel member, checking out what I've released so far, and look for the full book when it drops. In any case, let's dive into Clair Obscur, which has become very good at blowing up narratives. Now, if you didn't know, I am a massive fan of turn-based combat. I love strategic turn-based games like that. I'm also a big Magic the Gathering player, which has a similar strategic feel to it. But anyhow, it has been extremely frustrating for me over the years to watch as one of my favorite gaming franchises, Final Fantasy, they divorced themselves from one of my favorite methods of combat in gaming in favor of something I don't really care for personally. And once again, don't get me wrong, I know there are people who like the new method of combat for Final Fantasy, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you like it, then you like it. But what has been insufferable for me is listening to people tell me for years that the change had to happen because turn-based is dead. I remember one conversation in particular I had with a friend semi-recently where he told me that kids would never play a turn-based game, and the only way for Final Fantasy to grow is through this new combat system. Of course, I pointed out that the franchise has been hemorrhaging players for over a decade now, and that the only thing keeping it alive is its pedigree. My argument was, and still is, that Final Fantasy needs to return to its roots with an emphasis on classic turn-based combat and story, and forget this push to make the games look flashy and pretty. Looking neat is important, but not at the expense of the other two elements, considering that Final Fantasy came into prominence long ago when graphics were dog shit across the board. I'd argue that looking amazing, at least for its time, was never the biggest reason to play a Final Fantasy title. And considering the response that Clair Obscur is getting from fans and critics alike, the old formula for Final Fantasy still works. Look at this over on Metacritic. As I discussed the other day, Clair Obscur was rated extremely highly by the professional critic crowd. And of course, a lot of folks pushed back on that, saying that the opinion of game journalists is generally worthless, and I agree with that, but it was worth pointing out that this was a small, unknown studio that made Clair Obscur. Unlike something like Bungie or Bethesda, Sandfall, the studio that made this game, does not have the industry connections of the established studios. Therefore, the journalists weren't as incentivized to blindly love Clair Obscur as they are for something like Assassin's Creed or something like that. The likelihood of a more authentic review was higher with Clair Obscur, but that is irrelevant now. Take a look at the sterling score the game has from users on Metacritic. It is even higher than the critics, for Pete's sake. People are absolutely loving this game. Within a day of release, the official Clair Obscur X account announced that they had hit 500,000 sales. Not players, mind you. They aren't hiding behind the player statistic like Ubisoft did with Assassin's Creed Shadows and counting everyone who's playing the game on Game Pass. These are genuine sales that they are announcing. And just for reference, Assassin's Creed Shadows peaked at just under 65,000 players on Steam, so that's another game that Clair Obscur beat. Ubisoft has about 18,000 employees working for them, and Sandfall has about 30. That's quite the difference. And here's another narrative that Clair Obscur helps to eliminate. Every time a game like Avowed comes out and it flops, but it's released on Game Pass, the defenders of these games go on and on about how games released on Game Pass don't sell well because everyone is playing it on that platform. But we have a shitload of examples of games released on Game Pass that still sell, because gamers want to own games that are actually cool. Clair Obscur is one such title. Can you imagine how well this thing would sell if it had the Final Fantasy name attached to it? If this was called Final Fantasy 17, I suspect it would rejuvenate that franchise and bring back a lot of people who have checked out on the series in the past decade or so. Look at Baldur's Gate 3 as another example of a turn-based combat system, and it sold absolutely bonkers numbers. That game had the classic turn-based combat that so many people are thirsting for, and it had the Dungeons & Dragons IP to lean on. If Sandfall makes a name for themselves, the sky is the limit for what they can accomplish moving forward with games like Clair Obscur. But I'm gonna leave it there. What do you think about the Final Fantasy IP? Should they continue down the path they're on, or should they rethink things and go back to a turn-based model? Drop your thoughts into the comment section below, and we will talk there. Thanks for watching, me hearties. If you haven't already, your Admiral is inviting you to subscribe to the channel and become a part of the crew. Life as a space pirate may not be glamorous, but there's always plenty of booty.